Tonight in Greater Boston, a just-released GBH News investigation delves into the troubling volume of human labor trafficking in our state. Much of it going on in plain sight, and most of the traffickers getting away with it. GBH News' Jenifer McKim and Piedad, a labor trafficking survivor turned advocate, join me on what state leaders and the rest of us can do to stop it. Then later, journalist Anand Giridharadas on his new book, The Persuaders, an insider account of the activists, politicians, and everyday Americans on the front lines of preserving our democracy. Two Woburn men are facing federal human trafficking charges for allegedly smuggling Brazilians into the U.S. and then forcing them to work long hours at a pair of restaurants in the city for virtually no pay. It's an alarming story, but for advocates of labor trafficking victims, it is nothing new. Since 2016, nearly 200 people in Massachusetts have reached out to the National Human Trafficking Hotline to report allegations of forced labor. And as a new investigation from the GBH News Center for Investigative Reporting lays out, this is likely a vast undercount.
Most people have interacted with someone who is being trafficked and don't realize it. Think of it more as someone is being forced to work in terrible conditions, usually dangerous conditions, for unfair or no pay, and they can't leave.
A few years back, Attorney General Maura Healey established an anti-human trafficking task force, and more than a decade ago, the state passed a law aimed at prosecuting perpetrators and supporting survivors. But the GBH News investigation found there hasn't been a single forced labor conviction by the state since that law passed in 2011. That includes the so-called employers of Piedad, who spent months working for a family in Newton in 2014, hoping to earn money to send back to her children in the Philippines. Instead, they treated her like property, but were never prosecuted. Piedad joins me now, along with GBH News Deputy Investigations Editor Jenifer McKim. It's great to meet you, and Jenifer, thanks so much for being here. You know, virtually everybody knows about human trafficking. Sex trafficking, I'm sorry. You've done spectacular work. I would hazard to guess very few people know about labor trafficking. So could you fill in some blanks that were left there?
Thanks so much, Jim, for that. Yes, it's true. I've written a lot of stories on sex trafficking, and as we learned, it's a very underreported, misunderstood problem in America, and that we found that labor trafficking is even farther underground, that people just don't understand, that there are people, as you just heard the lawyer talk about, that are working as in house cleaners, working in construction, working in the fields, in all different ways in Massachusetts. And because because it's actual jobs, it's much harder to understand and see.
But I don't mean to overstate it, but the stories I read, and after having yours, this is a variation on slavery in the 21st century. Is it not in many of these cases?
Absolutely. They call it modern-day slavery, and Catherine can talk about that. People working for zero or very, very little pay, long, long hours, unable to leave their homes. It's really, really troubling. So
you were a nanny in the Philippines. Then you were brought here to work for a family in Newton. You work 6 days a week, from what I understand, right,
yes.
Catherine? How many hours on a typical day?
I work like 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
6 a.m. to 11 p.m.?
Yes.
And what were you able to do on your free day, the 7th day?
I'm just staying in the basement because I'm not allowed to go out.
You had to stay in the basement, and
yes.
This family said you can't leave the facility, you can't leave the house.
Yes.
Did they take your passport?
Yes.
How long did this go on?
It seems like 2 months that they took my passport, and we have this kind of conversation that they're not paying my salary, and yeah.
They paid you nothing?
No.
Were you scared?
I'm scared, of course, because I don't have anyone in this country.
And you eventually called 911, am I not right?
Yes, that's emergency call on my phone.
And what kind of response? What did the police do?
Oh, they came to the house like after 5 minutes of conversation. Yeah.
And did they end up bringing charges against the family that had basically kept you captive in the basement of their house?
No, because they said it's a labor dispute.
Labor dispute. You know, one of the things that's most troubling about your story, not only that so much is going on, Jen, sort of was going to say under the radar, but it's really not under the radar. It's just not. I want to play a little sound from your piece from State Senator Lydia Edwards, obviously from Boston, on trafficking, followed by a lawyer who represents another survivor about the employer of that survivor. Here it is.
It's modern day slavery, for heaven's sake. Like, you don't get to be a slaver in 2022 and write a check and settle that. You should go to jail.
Unfortunately, it was very frustrating. It didn't work because upon the first notification that the AG's office was looking into this and the employer's practices were about to be exposed, they immediately fled the country.
You know, so correct me if I'm wrong, a federal anti-trafficking law, I think in 2000, a state anti-trafficking law in 2011, and that's the good news. The bad news is very few charges brought, and I think you report not one single conviction on the state level and one from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Why and why? Why so few charges and why so few convictions?
Well, as you heard from Catherine, for one thing, there's a lot of confusion about whether it's actual trafficking or a wage and hour violation, and a lot of...
How is that confusing? How is it confusing? I don't mean to argue with you. You work 6 days from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., and your seventh day, you're essentially kept captive in the basement and not paid.
Exactly. So it's astonishing to me, and I mean, we also spoke with the Attorney General, Maura Healey, who has very interested in prosecuting these cases, but there are challenges. There's also some people who have been rescued or escaped and really just want some restitution and to get on with their lives, or they have certain attachment to the children that they were taking care of. So there's a lot of things that have happened. There are some cases ongoing. There's a case coming up in the new year, likely related to sex trafficking being filed by the Attorney General's office, but really it is pretty stunning.
You know, it's almost the opposite, and I'm not telling you something you don't know, but when I hear your story, it's almost the opposite of deterrence. I mean, a lot of people, including a father who very movingly lost his daughter at Parkland, who was here the other night, talking about why he believes in the death penalty because of deterrence. The flip side of that is when no one's prosecuted, and even if you're prosecuted, go free, there's almost no disincentive to treat people like Catherine was treated, because the worst that's going to happen, as Lydia Edwards says, you pay a fine, right?
Exactly.
So what do people in authority, I know Maura Healey cares about this. I'm sure Rachel Rollins cares about this.
Well, I spoke with her also.
And what'd she say?
She said it's underreported, underprosecuted, and I want to do something about it. She just started a human trafficking unit, and my understanding is there's things...
She being Rachel Rollins,
yes,
U.S. Attorney.
Yep.
So, Catherine, you've now become an advocate for people who suffered in similar situations like yours. What's the message that you put out in your work?
You know, when I was out there, when I get out in my employer, it's really hard. I didn't have no one, but when the process goes through, a lot of people helping me. A lot of good people also helping me along the way. So I really need that to pass along, and also helping people that you can see that they're gonna change their life because of your help. It's really seems like it's a really good feelings.
So you're hoping to provide a support network for people so that when they're free, they can live, not just the freedom that they deserve, but also have what they need to make a transition to. Who helped you? Who was there for you when you finally were out?
Mostly Julie Dahlstrom. I'm really grateful that he's my lawyer. She's my lawyer. Also, the Baquita's house.
She was put up with a house of nuns.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a kind of safe house that run by the nuns.
What's that mean? What did that mean to you? What did it mean to you?
Of course, it seems like it's a house for us, that it's helping support us, that when we are really in a down time of our life, they are the one who help us to lift it up. So yeah, we're so grateful that.
So I'll have to say that Catherine had told me in our interview is that the nun's house is now closed, and she's very concerned that there's no place for trafficking victims to go, and she's working with other advocates to try to find a place.
Well, I hope your reporting and your courage is going to convince other organizations to spend some dough. You know, I don't want to be all negative here about how horrible things are. One of the things it's actually at a BU. I know Healy was involved in the announcement. Explain what this app is and what the goal is.
So I think the Attorney General's office with the Boston University School of Law got together to create some app for actual people who are out in the field, either law enforcement or people who might have contact with people who are trafficked, to basically look at it and ask the right questions, because there are questions, I mean, so many people misunderstand it, and that's one of the things that we found, that there's just not enough training. And in other places...
You mean to even recognize it?
To even understand that it is trafficking, because in some states they mandate training for people who might be in contact. There has not been that type of thing here, even though when they passed this law a decade ago, it was recommended that there be some type of training. But at this point, people don't know even what to find out, and so they misunderstand it as a wage and hour violation, or they don't understand that someone can't leave their home.
Do you think something like that will help, this app? Do you think it'll help so that explain to people how to recognize situations like yours?
Yeah, absolutely. That ups if the result. Yes.
The result, that's what I should have said that. That's what it's called. I'm glad you said that. Yeah, I'm guessing this is not the end of the line. I know you a little bit, Jen. So I'm assuming there is more reporting to come. You're nodding in agreement. So
thanks. Yeah, absolutely. This is an ongoing series, Trafficking, Inc., Forced Labor in Massachusetts. This was our first piece that we came out with. Now we have a piece coming out next week related to the immigration issues that a lot of people have when they are finally escaped their traffickers, and yet there's so many obstacles in finding a way to survive. So that will be our next piece next week.
I don't want to do a spoiler kind of thing, but is there special support for people who've been lured into the country under these false pretenses and then kept like Catherine was? Or do they just face, I don't know, deportation? Is there...
So there is actually, 20 years ago when they passed this human trafficking law, they created a vehicle for people like Catherine to stay here. It's called a T-visa. But as our reporting will show, there's still a lot of obstacles to get it and a lot of time and issues. So that's what we're looking at next week.
Great reporting as always,
Thank
Jen.
you so
It's great
much.
to see you, and I'm really glad to meet you, and I admire your courage, Catherine. Good luck with your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jenifer McKim, Catherine Piedad. Next up, if you're like me and are convinced every election denier, every immigrant hater, every climate change skeptic is locked into their position with minds unable to be changed, and as a result, democracy hangs by a thread, who are you going to call? Anand Giridharadas. His new book suggests there may be a path out of the wilderness. It's called The Persuaders, at the front lines of the fight for hearts, minds, and democracy. Anand is also the author of the bestsellers Winners Take All, The True American, and India Calling, and a former foreign correspondent and columnist for the New York Times. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. So you heard me. If I say to you, democracy is doomed, I have virtually no hope, you say what?
I say, do you prefer to be ruled? Do you prefer to be governed by political violence? You know, for most of human history, group decisions that landed in the inboxes of communities were resolved through force or strong men. One person in the village or the state or the country is going to make the decision because it's too hard for all of us to talk. The radical idea of democracy, which this city plays a disproportionate role in the story of, is the idea that, no. Instead of the way we've done it for most of our history, we should now try this thing where we all just talk to each other 24/7, argue, haggle, negotiate over the future, and we will resolve these choices together. It was a crazy idea when it was articulated a few hundred years ago. It has become the norm, one of the most remarkable ideas, successful ideas in history. And at this moment, we are giving up on that idea that we are capable of changing minds or being changed. And I would say, therefore, we are giving up on the idea of self-government.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of your persuaders. You have scads of examples. Deep canvassing, what is it? Who are they?
Against my own despair, that was kind of channeling what you did, I went out and tried to find people for the persuaders that were doing this work. So deep canvassing is an experiment now happening across this country on different issues where people go door to door in their communities, neighbor to neighbor, They get a little bit of training online, and then they go and they stand in front of people, and instead of trying to do the 1-minute canvassing, hey, do you have a plan to vote? Move on.
Here's
give
a
you
piece
a flyer,
of literature, right, exactly.
move on. That's what we're all familiar with. What deep canvassers do, as the name suggests, is hang out. They stay. They try to keep that door open 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And what do they do in 30, 40 minutes? They try to elicit from you, respectfully, empathetically, with a lot of listening, why you feel the way you do about immigrants, why you feel the way you do about trans people, whatever the issue is. They don't lie about their stance. They're honest about the fact that they feel differently, but they elicit. They don't call you out every time you say a thing. And then, and this is the key, they start to mine your sources of dissonance with that perspective, not implanting the microchip of their view in you, but you say you don't feel this, you say you feel this way about trans people, but have you ever felt marginalized in your life because of forces beyond your control? And most people say yes. And then people start to see the conflicts within them.
You know, every single success like this that you described in your book, I say to myself, I celebrate that, but it has less value to me unless it's replicable. Is that replicable?
That is not only replicable. That particular experiment of deep canvassing has been studied in peer-reviewed studies. And this is remarkable. They have found that 30 to 40 minutes on a door at large scale can move a significant number of voters as much as years of diffuse social change.
Let's go to a woman who was leader in Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza. And you know, one of the things I loved about what you wrote about her and what she said, I am one of those people who always believe is if you overwhelm people with the facts, at the end of the day, you win out. And she has a great line that she sort of borrowed and changed from some feminists through the years. She says, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. What you mean?
She was quoting Maya Angelou there, and what she was saying was the political left, what I would frankly call the pro-democracy side in this country today, is very good on facts and figures, is very good on policy, is very good on, you know, the data. The problem is people's political preferences are often kind of emotional and psychological first. As Gen Z would say, people are often voting on vibes. And so Alicia Garza was making a plea to her own side on the left to say, our movement needs to give people a home that they're excited about, that makes them feel cared for. And the far right, for all of its dystopian visions, is actually very good at giving people a kind of exuberant, transcendental, connective experience. And the left's almost illiterate at that kind of appeal.
Wasn't that, I don't know if it was first broached, but Bob Putnam's legendary Right Down the Street, Bowling Alone. That's the point. Give people a home. Bowl with somebody. Don't let them be alone. That is the message, right?
Correct. And here's the irony. The right's vision for America is going to push us even more in the direction of bowling alone. But as a movement, tactically, it has a lot of connectivity. It has hunting clubs and gun clubs and evangelical church networks and homeschooling associations where parents connect. The left actually has not invested in that kind of people-to-people infrastructure that make people feel part of something.
What's the common thread? And I'm pretty sure there are common threads in virtually everybody you wrote about.
Yeah, they're all very different. The biggest common thread is the mental model of people on the other side for you. This is something everybody watching this should be able to relate to. I think we all know that we are internally complicated. You know you're complicated. I know I'm complicated. You may have an outward stance on X, Y, Z, but you know you feel other things also. We all have a B side on everything. We deny, in a polarized time, we deny that other people on the far side are also complicated. And when we do that, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. Because what you're saying is that prejudice against immigrants or trans people or whatever, that's the only story about them. It's empirically false, and it puts you in a position of having nothing to work with. In fact, everyone is conflicted, contradicted, as Beyonce says on her new album, and therefore, it becomes the job of the persuader to work with their B-side, to pull it out, to develop it, to compete with their outward prejudice or stance.
And you make clear you're not arguing, nor are the people that you're focusing on, that they compromise their principles or lessen their goals at all, right?
In fact, this book is an intervention in the reigning, I think, Democratic Party theory of persuasion in particular, which is persuade through dilution. Like, take an ambitious goal, pour a ton of water in it so it's thin gruel, and then, you know, working class white voters in Pennsylvania or whatever will like it more. What ends up happening is those people you're trying to reach, they still think you're a communist, and now your base is not excited about you anymore. I'm trying to flip that on its head, as are many of the subjects of this book, saying, Real persuasion happens by standing firmly for ambitious things, but doing better at explaining them, reaching out, and empathetically offering them to people who are skeptical.
That also, I assume, better explaining them also includes packaging. I don't know if you've ever seen the fabulous thing that Jimmy Kimmel did, where he sent people out to Hollywood Boulevard and asked them whether they preferred Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. Everybody hated Obamacare. Everybody loved the Affordable Care Act. There's a message in that that relates to what you're talking about.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's like, these things are laughable, but they're also very serious. You know, I would say, for example, one of my kind of obsessions is Medicare for all. You know, for those who advocate it, I think it should be called freedom care. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Stick to the ambitious demand, right? But why not tug on the heartstrings of a deeply felt American value and explain to people the true story of how universal health care would make them free from their boss, free from the vicissitudes of life. Package it in ways that meet people where they are.
Just don't go to Freedom Fries. That's a whole other historical story. You know, there are a couple of examples, one of which is in your book, that make me nervous that this all won't work. One is you write extensively about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and you mention a tweet she sent out when John McCain died. Let me just read it to people. John McCain's legacy represents an unparalleled example of human decency and American service. As an intern, I learned a lot about the power of humanity and government through his deep friendship with Senator Kennedy. He meant so much to so many. My prayers are with his family. What was the reaction from her supporters of that?
I think probably most people were fine with it, but a vocal minority of her allies, you know, lay people, allies on the left, progressives, were disappointed. You're embracing a warmonger. Have your anti-war politics, you know, been abandoned now that you entered power? And
even though it seems to me she was doing exactly what you were suggesting the progressives should be doing. No, with that
absolutely. She was maintaining a very clear anti-war stance, but making the kind of gesture that makes people think you're a reasonable, kind person, which is important. And what her critics did not understand that I think she did is something I call the orchestra principle in the book, which is making changes that requires a kind of ecosystem, right? A team that is doing, everyone's playing different roles. And there's this weird culture sometimes where we say, I'm an oboe player, and I therefore think it's weird that you're playing the cello. Why are you playing the cello? Why aren't you also playing the oboe? And I think we need to recognize it is someone's job in this ecosystem to throw tomato soup at a painting. You may not want to do that, but someone's doing that. It's someone else's job to eke out legislation. It's someone else's job to horse trade. It's someone else's job to sell it to the public. Respect other instruments. Respect other people in your coalition.
Let me give you one more example that I worry says maybe this won't work as well. I want to put up a poll. We used this the other night on the show. This was after every single hearing of the January 6th committee except the most recent one last week, and I'm sure you've seen this already. On every issue, January 6th is a riot, exact same numbers before and after. 6 was a legitimate protest, Trump directly responsible. Nothing changed, and I would argue, after having read your book, that Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney almost followed the principles of your book. Totally respectful, used Republicans to convey the message as witnesses, bipartisan committee, but it didn't work. They weren't able to change minds, at least so far. So why should that not discourage me from the persuader solution?
Well, I mean, I think it, you know, I think we're going to have to see the extent to which it changed minds. I would say, if you look more broadly, this notion that things don't change, like Donald Trump won the first time and did not win the second time. Some people who said yeah the first time said no the second time. We forget this. Like a whole bunch of, you know, 2021's anti-vaxxers are 2022's fully vaxxed people. Not all of them. A bunch of them are still not. But a bunch of them, we got vaxxed. And fortunately, there were people in this country who did not do the poo-poo write-off thing and went into communities and figured out, why are people not getting vaccinated in this community? Who do they trust? Who do they not trust? How do we change up the approach? I think in a democracy, writing other people off is the road to mayhem, chaos, and civil war. And we have to resist that write-off.
Can you do this in your own life?
Absolutely. I try to.
It's hard, isn't it?
It is. These characters, as I was reporting this book, I felt an imperative to change some of the things I was doing. I realized in particular some of my social media behavior, which is, you know, I think not out of keeping with a lot of people's social media behavior, was actually not helping with the goals that I sought. And so I think I have tried, I think I feel like there's this turning in the culture. We went in a very inflammatory direction in the last many years. And I feel like maybe this book is part of trying to push in a different way, and I felt myself going on that journey. You know, you have to bring people in. And I think if you want to win, it's not enough to be right or be righteous. You have to constantly be thinking about, who do I have in the camp today that I didn't have yesterday?
I want to be you when I grow up. Your book is terrific. Great
Thank
to
you
see
so
you
much
on.
for having me.
Thanks so much. Finally tonight, the ins and outs of question 3, which you'll see on your ballot in the coming weeks.
What would question 3 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 3 would change the state's alcohol licensing rules in a few different ways. First, it would gradually double the number of liquor licenses a single retailer can have for its chain of stores, going from the current 9 to 18 by the year 2031. Second, it would limit the so-called all-encompassing licenses to 7. So if a retailer wants to sell beer, wine, and hard liquor, it could only do that at 7 of its 18 locations, and that's assuming it got the maximum number of licenses. Third, it would ban self-checkout for alcohol purchases, so only face-to-face transactions. Fourth, it would make fines more expensive for retailers that sell things other than alcohol if they violate state law. And last but not least, it would let people use out-of-state licenses as proof of age to buy alcohol. So a yes vote would make all of those changes I just outlined, and a no vote keeps things as they are now. Now, supporters say this is a compromise measure. It ensures Packies can keep selling alcohol into the foreseeable future, while also acknowledging that the public wants the convenience of buying alcohol in different places, like grocery stores and convenience stores. Opponents argue the changes do little to promote real competition or consumer choice, and that the changed fines would unfairly penalize retailers that sell things other than alcohol. They also say this is just a Band-Aid that doesn't do enough on other aspects of liquor license reform, like license quotas and local oversight rules. And to that end, question 3, if it does pass and the laws do change, cities and towns still get the final say over who gets a liquor license in their jurisdiction. So, if you want retailers to potentially have more opportunities to sell liquor, to limit combo beer and liquor licenses, to ban self-checkout for alcohol, to charge stores that sell things beyond alcohol more if they're fined, and to let people use out-of-state IDs to buy alcohol, you vote yes on question 3. If you want things to stay just as they are now, you vote no.
That was Soraya Wintersmith reporting. We'll have one more explainer on the 4th and final ballot question. That's tomorrow here on GBH2 and at gbhnews.org. A reminder, early voting kicks off Saturday. If you plan on voting by mail, don't forget to request your ballot. Your application must be into your local election office by 5 p.m. on November 1st, and your filled-out ballot must be returned to that office or to a ballot drop box or postmarked by the time polls close on Election Day. And if you're voting the traditional way, polls will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on November 8th. For more info, head to sec.state.ma.us. That's it for tonight. Please come back tomorrow. Boston Globe's food writers just adopted a 5-star system for judging the region's restaurants. And Universal favorites Sarma and Somerville just got their first 5-star review. James Beard-nominated chef and co-owner Cassie Puma joins me with some of her otherworldly food. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget Ukraine.
East Africa,